Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, where we celebrate individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Rock Creek Coffee Roasters, home of small batch, freshly roasted coffee. Our guest today is Christine Peterson, outdoor enthusiast and freelance journalist. Christine is also a former president of the Outdoor Writers Association of America. She has written for Outdoor Life, National Geographic, High Country News, and many more publications. Christine, it's a pleasure to finally have you as our guest on the Outdoor Adventure Series. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate your interest and your patience with me.
Well, it's funny because I think we've been kind of planning this for like a whole year. I mean, life just happens. And first off, I want to thank you for taking the time. And I have to ask, are you still decompressing from being the president of the Outdoor Writers Association?
But my presidency finished at an opportune time, the beginning of summer. And so I was able to spend most of the summer outside and not worried that I was missing a meeting and didn't have an internet connection. And how was I going to get my computer to the top of the hill so that I could give myself a hotspot to run something? So yeah, it's been good. I miss some of the camaraderie and I am happily filling that time with who knows what else. All
Fantastic.
this.
Fantastic. Now, I definitely want to talk about your love and your work in the outdoor space and also as a journalist. But if you could, for our listeners, share a little bit about your background and how you got into journalism and especially then began to explore this outdoor passion that you have.
Sure. I've been a journalist for most of my life. I started running a kids page for the Casper Star Tribune, which is the Wyoming state newspaper, when I was 16. And then I interned for them in college and bounced around a little bit after there, but ended up back at the Star Tribune as a city reporter for a couple of years, which is not in the outdoors. But I'm born and raised in Wyoming and spent a lot of my time outside in various ways, mountain biking and backpacking and a lot of camping and hiking and what most people do in Wyoming in the West. And brand new husband and I were traveling for about a year after I left the paper, and I got a job offer to do the outdoor gig if we came home in 6 months, which was sort of the plan, sort of not the plan. And I didn't know, so I spent a 12-hour bus ride from Oaxaca, Mexico to Cancun thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and got to the Cancun bus station and accepted the job. Spent another 6 months or so on the road and then came back as the outdoor reporter. And that I covered the outdoors then for the Star Tribune in Wyoming for well over a decade before I left to become a freelance outdoor writer. So, and through that has taken me all over the place, but I still live in Wyoming and love the state and love what it has to offer. And the issues that are here are often emblematic of a lot of the issues that are facing the outdoors in certainly in the West, but also all over the country. And so it's a really great place to meet people and understand what they're going through.
Very good. I was born and raised in the Detroit suburbs, and I always joke with who will listen to my joke that on the back of my birth certificate says you must root for a Detroit team. It's against the law to root for anybody else. And the reason is Detroit Lions my entire life have, they never show up to play football.
Yeah.
In Wyoming, I can imagine on the back of your birth certificate, it says, the stamp says, I must love the outdoors.
Yeah.
Because I think I hear everybody that lives in Wyoming, there's some connection to the outdoors from the early in life to wherever they are, whatever they're doing today. Do you find that you were just introduced at a very young age, just given the nature of what Wyoming is as a state?
I do think that. I mean, it's um there are not very many of us, 500,000 people in a really big state. The joke's always there are more pronghorn than people. There aren't anymore. Pronghorn aren't doing great,
Yeah.
but there aren't a lot of us, and most of us grow up in really rural places. I grew up in the second largest city, which is about 55,000. And but if you don't like to be outside, there's just not a ton to do, especially
Yeah.
depending on where you are. And
Yeah.
so I think that most people come here for the outdoors. There's some that come for jobs, but a lot of people come here because they want to be outside and they want what Wyoming has to offer that way. So yes, it is a part of our fabric for sure.
Okay. When you were growing up, did you have the parents, the grandparents, the siblings that just introduced you to a variety of activities? How did the different passions that you have, how did those start to evolve?
Yeah, my parents for sure, and an older brother. My grandparents were on both coasts, and so my parents landed here. They met in Albuquerque, New Mexico in the 60s, and Albuquerque got too big for them, and so I kid you not, threw a dart at a map, and it landed in Casper, Wyoming. So my dad applied for jobs there, and they moved. But yes, they had an orange Volkswagen bus, and
Uh,
every weekend loaded my brother and I and the gigantic dogs up in that bus, and we drove somewhere. And in my mind, we were having the grandest adventures. We may as well have been driving to the Yukon, even though usually it was the backside of Casper Mountain, which was like 30 minutes from our house.
yeah.
And there's a little hammock seat in the front, hammock stretched between the two front seats, and that was where I slept. The top popped up, and that was where my brother slept, and that was childhood. So we spent just a lot of time. Nothing was huge. Nothing was a big, really big production. It was just a lot of low key adventures that gave us a lot of time to do whatever we
Mhm.
wanted
E-
outside.
Excellent. Which activity did you kind of gravitate to in the beginning that you really like? This is fun.
Camping was always my favorite. That was
Yeah.
what, and still is. We probably camp. Turkey hunting season starts in the middle of April.
Hmm.
And so we usually camp from the middle of April every weekend and big chunks of the summer. My husband's a teacher, and so he has the summers off most of the summer and then into November, which April and November are iffy months in my
Yeah.
state weather-wise. But camping, I think, was always the favorite. And then we mountain biked and Nordic skied a lot growing up. And my husband grew up hunting and fishing. I did not grow up on the consumptive side.
Right.
But then since we got together in college, that has been a great merging of our lives. So now we spend a lot of time hunting and fishing and a lot of time mountain biking and skiing and camping.
I love that. In a little bit, I'd love to hear more about this experience, especially with. I know I've seen at least one picture of you with your daughter, but I just love the idea of this little girl getting to do all these cool things, and it's like she's got a smile on her face, and I want to hear more about that. But speaking of kids, you mentioned that you had started this column for the paper, this kids column. Tell us more about that.
Oh, so that when I was very young, it was a
Yeah.
kids page. So we just
Yeah.
had, I was actually a designer.
Okay.
And there were kids from the community that wrote poems and drew pictures and stories
Okay. Okay.
and then designed them as a page. Yes. So I have written a lot about motherhood though,
Oh,
since we had Miriam, which is my daughter.
okay. Very cool. Now, how did you decide to go into journalism?
Um, I wanted it's an interesting question that for some reason I never have a concise answer for.
Eh,
Honestly, probably the quickest answer is my older brother told me to take journalism class when I went to 10th grade. So I
Okay.
signed up for journalism. But I love telling stories, and mostly I love asking people questions.
Yeah.
Every, I asked everybody questions. I started a newspaper when I was in fourth grade. I don't know. I don't know why. I think I just wanted a way to ask people questions that weren't socially acceptable for me to just ask them.
Mhm.
And for being a journalist gave you a reason to ask questions that weren't socially acceptable. And then as I got older and was maybe able to form a more coherent, mature answer.
Okay.
I feel like it's important to inspire people to go outside, to know what's going on around them. And so it's a mixture of enjoying telling stories
Hmm.
and hoping to affect some kind of change or grow awareness of issues. And then also, frankly, I still just like asking questions. I'm insatiably curious.
Yeah.
So,
I love that answer. I mean, that's what I love the best about podcasting. And also as a business coach, I get to ask questions as well,
oh,
not knowing what the answer is going to be, and you just kind of roll with it. And
mhm,
I think that's why I love like the OWAA as it's a journalistic organization or any organization, but a lot of it is just built around asking questions,
sure.
and that's fantastic. Now, couple years ago, I don't know whether it's 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the the journalism in our country has kind of taken a hit. I mean, a lot of people are being affected by consolidations in newspapers and radio and television. What led to you perhaps walking away? Maybe that's not the right choice of words, but going away from the 4-page journalistic lifestyle where you get a paycheck to this more outdoor freelance lifestyle. What kind of led you to that?
I wanted to I partly I was the last few years that I was at the newspaper, I was the managing editor, and that was a big job and important, but I also wasn't writing very much,
Mm,
and I wanted to write more. I wanted to write more about the outdoors, and so it was time. Miriam, my daughter, was 2, and I wanted to spend more time with her, and
mm,
I wanted to spend more time writing about the outdoors, mostly. And
okay.
so that was what it just wasn't there wasn't going to be a way for me to do that at the paper full
Okay.
time I wanted to anymore. And so then this allowed me to write full time about the outdoors and also broaden my reach quite a bit. I had
Okay.
just been covering Wyoming for a very long time.
Mhm.
And so this allowed me to broaden that out to other states, other countries, other issues, other species, and learn about things that I just hadn't been exposed to yet.
Okay.
So it is, I mean, it was different in that it wasn't a consistent every 2 weeks paycheck, but
Mhm.
um in many ways, the media industry is an insecure enough one that freelance didn't actually feel all that much more insecure than a job at a newspaper.
Okay. Okay. So I am curious if you were speaking to a group of, say, high school students. It doesn't really matter whether they would be female or male, but they wanted to be writers or journalists because they'd heard about you. Perhaps they read an article or two. What advice would you give to those students at that age who are about to embark on 4-year college, community college, about the importance of writing and journalism?
Um, as in, what would I say to inspire them to do it, or what would I tell them as like hot tips to figure
Uh,
out how?
how about inspire to do it?
I do think that it is. I do think that it is a really effective way to raise awareness for things that you care about. And I think there's a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. And so I think there's also a big need for good journalists who think critically about issues and are willing to put the time in to cultivate sources who are knowledgeable and then distill that information down into something that the general public can read and understand and care about. There's so much happening right now, and there's so much information out there for people to consume that I think there's a great need for good storytelling and the ability to connect everyone who's staring at the little box in their hand or the slightly larger box on their desk and connect them with what's going on outside or what's going on with whatever you care about as a person. It doesn't have to be the outdoors, but I think it can be a very powerful way to connect people to what matters.
Okay. Now, you've written for a number of well-known publications, Outdoor Life, National Geographic, and then you also spoke about High Country News, and you also shared in the show notes TROUT. I don't know if that's a website or a magazine, but how did you begin to then establish your credentials and really your reputation for being, an accomplished writer and journalist, but now actively producing content in some very well-known logos and publications, whether they be magazines or online. So how did you begin to kind of establish yourself there?
I, I mean, I spent a lot of years deeply covering issues for the newspaper
Mhm.
and to some degree making a name for myself that way, just as somebody who really understood what was going on here. And then honestly, a lot of it was OWAA and
Okay.
meeting contacts there and meeting editors and then starting to reach out and saying, "Hey, can I write a story?" The first story I ever freelanced was an essay about elk hunting, and I wrote it for Bugle, which is the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation magazine, and the editor, Paul Cano, is a longtime OWAA member and a good friend of mine, and so I got up the nerve to pitch him that story idea at an OWAA happy hour, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds great. Send it along." And so that was and then that's freelance, right? You just the first National Geographic story I sold was a pitch that I wrote, and I spent a long time finding the right editor to send it to and reached out, and she was interested, and I knew it was a story that I had unique access to about grizzly bears, and I wrote a pitch that I thought would fit them well, and that's a lot of the game is finding the right person and the right contact and giving them something you think they need.
Okay. As you are engaged now in the writing, I mean, as we come towards the end of 2022, the climate change, the environment is it's front page on the news, literally. At least my perception of it is. Why is it so important now for writers like yourself to, yeah, a new kind of gun is nice and fishing, the newest, greatest technology and fishing is nice, but to talk about the environment and this confluence between environment, stewardship, and the people who are engaging in those activities, why is it so important to bring these kind of three voices together? Why do you think that?
I mean, because that's we we being people who play outside, are gonna be some of the I mean, not necessarily the first impacted, right? I mean, there's huge chunk of the desert Southwest that's gonna be very impacted as this drought continues. There's
I can attest to
hurricanes,
that.
right? Like you with the hurricanes that are worsening, and so there's a lot of people that may or may not recreate outside at all, whose lives are being upended by climate change. But but for most of us that like to play outside and spend our time outside, we are some of the first witnesses to what's going on. And it's important that we recognize what's going on with the wildlife that we love and the outdoor spaces that we love, and that we be some of the witnesses to tell everybody, hey, this is a problem and we need to address it, which is something that I do write about a lot. And to try to raise awareness and help people really understand that what they're seeing might be an issue of mismanagement or something on the ground, but a lot of what we're seeing is a symptom of these really big changes that we can work on.
Sure. As you take perhaps a look backwards from today, when you grew up, I mean, you in Wyoming, and you had the outdoors, you had for the fish, the streams, the wildlife, the birds. Is there a one or two changes that are kind of give you pause for a while? This is not like it was when I was growing up. I mean, there was just
Um,
so many more fish, there were so many more birds. What was that? What are some of those big changes for you?
I mean, there's certainly because I didn't grow up hunting and fishing, I don't know that I was as probably not as acutely aware, certainly from the fish side. One of the biggest things is for me is snowpack.
Mm.
And that winter, most of the time growing up, we were skiing often before Thanksgiving, certainly shortly after Thanksgiving. And now opening day for the downhill areas keeps getting pushed and pushed and pushed. This year was a little earlier than it has been. It's kind of a one-off better snow year, but
Mhm.
the last few years we haven't been skiing till after Christmas, and
Oh, wow.
that's very different. And then there's also just our herds are struggling. Our pronghorn herds are struggling, our deer herds are struggling, elk are doing really well, but there is there are just fewer, and that is noticeable on the landscape.
Okay. As you and your family, your husband, your little one go out and explore outside, what types of activities kind of give you three the most joy to do as a family?
In an attempt to not sound too broad or cliche, anything.
Okay.
I mean, there is so much joy. I've been thinking about this more, and I texted this to myself because it was just so adorable that she said this, but we were pheasant hunting this
Uh,
past yesterday and the day before at at an area that we go to a lot of times, a couple hours north of where we live, and it was cold. It was 14 degrees when we were driving there in the morning, and so we bundled up and walked out, and we were walking through some willows, and Miriam, who is 6, which is not all that old, she said, "This is like a wonderland with all of the snowflakes in the air and the ice on the willows and the sun shining through them. It's magical." And I mean, it was really very pretty. It was also very cold, and she
sure.
was getting whipped in the face by icy willows, and she was just like, "But look at the sun coming through the ice," and it was so pretty to her, and that I think any time that the 3 of us are outside, wherever we are, doing whatever it is, at the beach or playing in the water, on the top of a mountain, I mean, those are what bring us peace and make us feel joyful.
I love that, and I have to admit I'm a little envious because, yes, I am in Las Vegas, but I find myself doing exactly what we're doing right now on a computer, talking to somebody, whether
Yeah.
it's podcasting or coaching, and so I am doing the, Christmas bird count activity here up in, Pahranagat, which is about 90 minutes north of Las Vegas, so I will get out there.
Nice. Yeah.
It's it's nice because I mean, you just never know, where people think of Las Vegas as the Las Vegas Strip, and I could care less about it. It's everything else around it that I enjoy. I recall earlier in the fall, you and your husband, Miriam, you'd gone, I don't know if it was deer hunting or elk hunting, but I think you ended up getting, I don't know what the right choice of words is, but you got one,
Yep.
you know,
Yep. Elk hunting. Yep.
elk hunting.
Got an elk. Yep.
Yes. By the way, elk sausage, I've had it before, smoked sausage. It's like, oh my God, it's so good. But I digress. I'm all about food, by the way.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Remember you had chatted about having to go back and forth between where the kill was and bringing it down the hill, the mountain, so to speak. And there was something special about letting your daughter carry something in her backpack that was a part of this kill. I don't recall what it was, or and just so what I'm curious about is that desire at that age to be involved in these kinds of activities and really feel like, hey, as a 6-year-old, I've accomplished something, and know that you've accomplished something. So, what was it like to kind of share this experience with her?
Yeah, so that she has been with us hunting since she was a baby.
Yeah.
And it's been so it has been tough to always know how to introduce a small child to hunting and to death because it's a hard one. I didn't start hunting until I was an adult, and it took
Mhm.
me a long time to get to the point where I was willing to actually pull the trigger on something. And the first antelope that I shot, she was there. I mean, she was with my husband back at the truck, but they came after I killed the antelope, and she was 3, and we were not she was very curious about it, but also, like, how much field dressing do you show a 3-year-old?
Mm,
And so we sort of sent her off to find sticks and
right.
rocks, things like that to help us with it so that she didn't see quite as much. But as she has gotten older, and this particular one, my husband shot an elk right at dusk, not long before shooting hours were over. And And so he and a friend field dressed it at the time, and it was like a mile plus away
Mhm.
from the track. And so they field dressed it and carried out what they could. And then we went in the next morning very early, started walking in the dark and got up there. And she gets the seriousness of it, but also certainly understands that that's what we eat. And it was interesting because she is not sure she wants to hunt. I've asked her lots of times, and
Mhm.
she's like, I don't know. But she really wanted to help carry something. She wanted to help carry the antlers. Can I
Mhm.
carry the head? Well, I mean, an elk head is quite large,
That's
and
big.
antlers are quite heavy, and it was not an easy hike down this mountain. And there's just, like, not a lot on an elk that a small person can carry, right? I mean, a quarter is 50, 60 pounds,
Mhm.
which is more than she weighs. But elk have ivories,
Mhm.
which are these very ancient sort of leftover tusks, essentially. And so a lot of hunters will keep those even if they leave the head in the field. And so my husband had pulled the ivories out and wrapped them in a glove and said, "Well, you can carry the ivories out." And that was really special seeming to her. So we shoved them in her pocket, and then she had the piece of the elk that she could carry out, which gave her a stake in it, right?
Yeah.
That gave her a piece of that, which I think then makes her feel even more involved in all of these things that we go on. And as she gets older, like all kids, they want to be more helpful till presumably they hit their teenage years and then don't want to be helpful at all. But we're
Right.
still at the wanting to be helpful stage of life. And that was her way of being more a part of what we're doing, which I think
E
is im
Excellent, excellent. I'd like to shift a little bit to kind of your adventures now as a writer. I know you were in it was it Iceland or somewhere where there was the Northern Lights, which is on my bucket list, by the way. But what has been some of the exciting places you've gone to in service of your work that really have been special for you?
um, I mean, that Iceland was great. That was actually a family trip,
Okay.
which was really a great thing to be able to do. My parents came and then my brother and his daughter, so there were multiple generations, and that was really lovely. For I mean, from a reporting standpoint, I spent 5 days in Alaska floating a river in interior Alaska for a story for Outdoor Life about a really very unremarkably named river, Lake Creek, which very few people are gonna know about. But it still I mean, by lower 48 standards, it would be an insane river. It's got 5 salmon species that run in it, and Dolly Varden, and gray Arctic grayling, and rainbow trout. It's an incredible fishery. By Alaskan standards, it's just like another river, but it still faces a lot of threats from culverts and roads and mines and everything that rivers are facing all over the world. The head of it is a fishing lodge where my husband and I have worked off and on for a number of years,
Mhm.
but neither of us had ever floated the river. It's accessible by boat for about the first mile or so, and then it goes through rapids, and you can only do it by river or um by raft, and there's no going back up unless a helicopter comes and gets you.
Okay.
So that was very special to be able to go down and intimately see this river that I had known the headwaters of for a long time and better understand what threats it faces. So that was really neat. I went duck hunting in California for another Outdoor Life story, just on the future of hunting in California, which was wonderful to be able to understand more what the role that hunting plays in conservation and the
Mhm.
role that the dollars that are raised through hunting play in conservation and how that fits into how we manage wildlife. So those have been two pretty great experiences in through work. But I also, for the newspaper, I trapped grizzly bears and did a 3-part series on Peruvian sheep herders in Wyoming, which was very fascinating. Spent a couple days in the red desert of Wyoming in February and 20 below zero weather with a sheep herder drinking Boone's Farm out of teacups, eating ramen. So yeah, there's been some fascinating stories for sure.
That's good. That's good. Now, I've got two more questions on the just the getting out there and doing the work. But have you ever been in a situation which gave you pause, like, oh my God, I'm like I'm doing this. I can't believe it. But it's, I mean, there's a little danger, maybe there's a little excitement, but anything you kind of look back and go like, wow, this is where I'm at, like right in this moment.
Yeah. I've actually that it's interesting to put it that way because I have been trying to be more cognizant a lot lately of like, wow, this is where I am. I was at a fishing lodge in northern Manitoba a couple months ago and walking outside right below the Arctic Circle and laid down on a bed of lichen and thought, dang, I guess this is what I do for work. Just kind of wild. But I was on a horseback trip in the Tetons 3 years ago, probably now. I guess 3 years ago. And I was on a mule, on a very good mule, and we were we were packing up a long shale hill that was, I mean, it was a very steep hillside, and there was a trail, and we were backing up. And there were a couple of horses that were not used to such a high elevation and not used to such steep terrain, and they were near the top. And one of them started to roll, laid down and started to roll, and it knocked into the other one, and they both
Oh,
came careening down the hill
oh wow.
at us, and they were probably 10 stock behind me. And they both regained their footing, one a little bit lower than me and one right above me, and it just kept coming. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, it was a 2,000-foot drop below us. I couldn't do anything. So I just sat there and my mule just stood there. And then the horse came to a stop 6 inches from my mule's nose, and they just stared at each other. And I stared at them
Oh
and
wow.
thought, I don't know. I guess this is how I go. And we sort of all regathered ourselves and got to the top of the hill. And it was wild to me that that mule had not flinched, that there was something that was so he was so sure of himself that he was going to be fine, and it made me trust just a little bit more while also being very scared and nervous.
I love that. And it's like, I can only imagine what that must have been like in that moment, living that moment. Given these experiences that you have had, and maybe this question just kind of irrelevant now in a way, but it's like, is there some part of what you're doing that is your favorite, or is it kind of everything?
I think it is probably everything, but my favorite is still calling people and asking questions. I
Yeah.
mean, it still is finding the answers to these things that I am wondering, and even better is when I am surprised by the answer. And you never know what a person's gonna say. So every phone call I make, I have the opportunity to be surprised by what
Okay.
somebody would say. And that is, for all of the very cool things that I have done outside, which I do love, I think at its base, work-wise, my favorite is still just asking questions and seeing what people say.
Okay. As you get to have these experiences doing what you love, talking to people, hearing what they have to say, what kind of hope do you have for our future, especially as it involves the environment and the outdoors and getting people like me who are novices in the outdoors? I mean, I, I probably would not be on that mule,
Yeah.
okay, on that steep terrain, but I still want some experience. But what hope do you have for people like me and others getting to very experienced writers and outdoor enthusiasts really to realize we have to come together to fix things? So in order to do that, we have to have hope for the future that this is going to make a difference. What's your hope?
I'm working on that. Sometimes it's hard to have a lot of hope, especially when you write about the issues that I write about, but I do think that it is easy to feel apocalyptic.
Mhm.
And I think that feeling apocalyptic is dangerous because the second that we feel like all is lost is the second that we stop caring.
Mm.
And so I think the fact that there still are so many pronghorn out there and so many elk, and while bird numbers are decreasing drastically, migratory birds, wetland birds are actually doing pretty well. And that's because of the work that we have done, humans have done to try to fix their habitat. And so I think for every example there is of things going wrong, there are also examples of ways that people are doing the right thing and are coming together to improve what's out there. And I think that at its core, everyone needs to be aware of what we can lose in
Mhm,
order to care enough to try to fix it and keep
mhm.
it.
As you again take a look at the work that you have been doing, the conversations, I can imagine whether it's on the street, maybe in your community, people know what Christine Peterson does, or at the OWA conference. And as a former officer and a very active member, when people come up to you and say, "Wow, Christine, I really enjoyed that piece," or that piece is going to be really helpful for what we're trying to do in our work here. What kind of aha moment does that give you in to know that you're doing the right thing, you're in the right place, making the difference and feeling really good about it?
Um, I mean, I feel like any amount that I can connect somebody to an issue or to a landscape that they're not familiar with is is a success. I don't know if there is a particular moment, though I think especially as far as taking kids outside, there's been a lot of what I have written that has elicited some comments from other moms like, "Oh, I didn't really think about doing it that way," or "I didn't think that I could take them with me here." And that I think there's value in that. And I also just yeah, I mean, I think anytime that I can connect people to a world that's outside of their screen is a success.
I love that. I love it. Before we head out, we have another feature on our podcast. We call it the Insight to Go. And really, this is an opportunity for our guests to share a quote, it could be a piece of work, a book, eh, so that our listeners can grow. Because ultimately, I want to change people's mindsets when they listen to this podcast. And I hope through my guests that we can achieve that goal. What would be your insight to go for our listeners? If you'd like to share.
So there's an Aldo Leopold quote, and it addresses hunters, but I think there's a broader application. He says, "A particular virtue in wildlife ethics is that the hunter ordinarily has no gallery to applaud or disapprove of his conduct. Whatever his acts, they are dictated by his own conscience rather than by a mob of onlookers." And I think the point of that, and especially the point of that where it relates to our relationship with the outdoors, is that we are really responsible for our own behavior, and that we often have these chances, whether hunting or fishing or camping or hiking or going off trail somewhere we know we probably shouldn't go off trail, or getting closer to wildlife than we realistically know that we should be getting, that we need to have in the back of our mind that we have the opportunity to do what's right by us and by our own conscience and by our own morality, and that
Mhm,
that's something that we should be thinking about, that it shouldn't just be what if somebody sees me do the wrong thing or not. It should
mhm.
just be doing the right thing outside because that is the right thing to do.
Very good. Well, I know our listeners are going to appreciate that. And Aldo Leopold and his writing is not lost on me. And because we've had some other guests who, I mean, he's an icon in the space. So I appreciate you sharing that. I am curious, but before we do our final close, any new projects coming up for you that that you're open to sharing or can share with us? That's some
Um,
further adventures.
oh, sure. I wrote a story on adventures with kids, a feature for the next Outdoor Life issue that's coming out very soon. And it really looks at what is responsible for us to be doing with kids, especially when it comes to bigger adventures. There's a quote in there That's probably one of my favorite quotes from a source ever, which is, "Kids can do anything, but that doesn't mean we should ask them to do everything." And I think that's a really important one to think about. So that's an interesting story that is coming out, and I'm also just looking at 2023 and wondering what it'll bring.
There you go. I love it. Thank you. Now, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
There is probably my Instagram, which is She Will Roam, and then I'm also on Facebook. I try to post things with some regularity, stories that are important to me, and then there's also my website, which is christine-peterson.com.
Fantastic. Well, we will provide the backlinks to your website at Christine Peterson-Peterson.com, as well as to your Instagram and Facebook pages. Christine, I'm so glad we were finally in the final throes of 2022 able to reconnect. And I love the fact that I get to follow you on Facebook and on Instagram and know of your great work, and your photographs are amazing. I especially, there's a couple in there. By the way, I never did say that how much of an opportunistic podcaster I am, because I always ask my guests for some photos I could share in our show notes. So if you're okay with that, I would love to pull some down from Facebook and put those on our website. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate the time so much.
Very good. Well, it's just been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to seeing you next year, hopefully in Gulf Shores, and wish you the best for the holiday season. And you're learning about your further adventures. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
All right. Stay on the line. We're going to do a quick close, and you and I can have a final chat. Okay. Great. All right, folks. We have just been chatting with Christine Peterson, outdoor enthusiast, freelance journalist. Really just, it's a honor, really. I mean, because the OWAA, Outdoor Writers Association of America, I was introduced to them a couple of years ago. At this time, Christine had just taken on the role of as president. And so whenever I was on a call or Zoom call in person at an event, she was always busy. And so finally, after ending her term as president, I had the pleasure, as we kind of closed down 2022, to have her on the podcast and just really to learn about her and her background and her passions. And we're going to share more about that in the show notes. We'll provide some links back to some of her publications, and you're going to see some of the photos as well. And I was especially just loving how she was introducing here. She and her husband were introducing their daughter Miriam to just these outdoor adventures. I'm thinking, my family and I went to Holiday Inn Express on the weekends. So in any case, I digress, but just a phenomenal episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well. You will be able to see the links to the episode on outdooradventureseries.com. We're on Facebook and on LinkedIn on our Outdoor Adventure Series pages. On our website, you'll also see the photos that we're going to share, and everywhere you're also going to be able to click on the links to Christine's website, as well as to her Instagram and Facebook pages. And you can listen to this episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Okay. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. We are in the final throes of 2022. So also make your New Year's safe and spend time with your friends and your family. Stay healthy. And we hope you have a fantastic 2023. Until next time, this is Howard Fox on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. Take care now.